Welcome back to the Sense of Life podcast. My name's Cody.
And I'm Joe.
And the moment has arrived. I have become filled with terrible purpose.
Yeah.
It's Dune. We're talking Dune.
Yeah, this might be our most ambitious episode so far. I think the second most ambitious one was when we read
probably Three Musketeers.
Three Musketeers, because that's quite a long book. But this was
reading
quite a long book, watching two movies, one that was still in theaters, and the David Lynch adaptation from the 80s. Now, the version that
there was a lot of homework.
The version that we watched was the theatrical version of Lynch Dune, as it were. There is no director's cut in the sense of like actually being cut by the director, but I do believe there is a quote-unquote director's cut of that movie that has more scenes.
Well, that's kind of what all director's cuts are.
Sure.
Save a few different people, but like the director's cut's always been like a marketing scheme. Basically.
Oh yeah. I think going all the way back to like Ridley Scott's fucking Blade Runner.
There's like
really
80,000 cuts to that movie.
Yeah. And
I've seen the final cut. That's the only one I've seen.
Yeah, is that the 2007 one? Or whatever?
It's the latest one, whenever that was.
Yeah, that's the only one I've seen. I've heard the original like theatrical version is bad just because it's got like retarded voiceover shit in it, and it's like it has really bad lines like Harrison Ford saying like, "Oh, sushi. My ex-wife used to call me that." It's like really fucking awful. It's just bad. And he delivers it with all the enthusiasm of a guy who doesn't want to record a voiceover.
It's like those voiceovers he gave for like the Empire Strikes Back.
The Empire Strikes Back or something. Like Han Solo, Luke Skywalker, Chewbacca, Princess Leia, the gang's all here, or whatever the fuck he says.
It's amazing.
Yeah, he doesn't give a shit. He never has about Star Wars, and it's fucking great.
It's kind of crazy given how his career started and like almost didn't start, but then started because of Star Wars, and then and then he became a hater. Basically.
Yeah, the thing is, I don't even think he's necessarily a hater of like George Lucas. It's just like he's a hater of Star Wars specifically as a product, because like he loves Indiana Jones, and that was like Spielberg and George Lucas like fucking Arnold Schwarzenegger handshake, you know, that fucking thing.
Yeah.
They were that was them doing that.
That was the Batman and Robin dynamic duo.
Yeah. So as far as Dune goes, I think we're going to try to stick with talking about the novel, and then move on to the Villeneuve movies, and then the Lynch adaptation at the very end.
Yes.
Because at the same time that I don't think there's too much to say about the Lynch one, there is kind of a decent amount that I think I have to say about it, just in relation to like being an adaptation of a book, because it's really it skips over a fuck ton of shit.
Yeah.
But yeah, as far as the book goes, I went in very skeptical of the whole aesthetic of it. I basically just knew it was like Muslims and space drugs, and I was like, like, okay, that's strange. And you always hear it described as like this very like esoteric, like dense, hard to get into thing. But I think coming from a background of playing like Hideo Kojima games where he just throws terms at you and you're just like, okay, I'm supposed to know what this, I'm just supposed to like let this wash over me. I kind of didn't have a problem with all of the terminology. I actually really enjoyed it.
My favorite parts, really, at least in the first half of the book, were just these kind of boring, weird descriptions of the inner machinations and politics of like space Islam.
Right.
And I found it so entertaining, just like describing like what what did the Bene Gesserit do? Why are they doing this? Why are they such shady bitches?
The Padishar Emperor and the Great House Atreides and the House Harkonnen and all this other stuff. It's a really rich world. Just like even if Dune had stopped at that book, it would be like you can tell why it's like a sci-fi classic. And it kind of influenced pretty much every bit of sci-fi that came after it.
Right.
And
actually, speaking of sci-fi classics, there in the world of Dune, I think it's it has to be the currency, right? It's called Solaris.
Yeah.
Which
Solaris,
is the name of the novel I went on Rare Candy to talk about. Which was an earlier sci-fi novel. It's called Solaris.
Okay.
So there was a weird connection that happened there.
Yeah.
That I found entertaining.
Now, this is kind of like there was like a wave of people that were really getting into Dune. And you always hear of like Dune being this sci-fi classic, but when the first Villeneuve movie came out, there was like a wave of people that like got into Dune. And I think the same thing is kind of happening again with the part 2 that just came out.
Right.
So I would imagine if you were to look at the sales figures for the book, it's probably gone way up.
Yeah.
But yeah, that whole like first half of the book, I've encountered some people on Twitter who I follow that talk about like art and stuff, and they weren't really a fan of the book. And it's you see things like J.R.R. Tolkien said he hated Dune. And the whole thing with that was literally like he didn't even say why he didn't like it. He just said like I very much dislike it, but I won't, out of like courtesy to Frank Herbert, I won't get into it. And it's like, well, you know why he didn't like it though, because like you look at the kind of thematic element that you've got to the Lord of the Rings, and then you look at the thematic element of Dune, which is, I wouldn't even say they're necessarily opposite, but Dune seems a lot more fatalistic in its portrayal of its themes, where you've got like even the good guys with the best of intentions kind of fall to this horrific fate or become corrupted because like the nature of politicking destroys the human soul.
Yeah.
The whole thing with like Duke Leto, the Paul Atreides' father, is like probably the most morally pure character in the book, and I guess in the movies too, because he's like a man of the heart. He rules with the heart, as it were, where he values human life over like the profits of, you know, being a governing body and stuff like that. And in a world full of individuals that are power hungry, that being that kind of person gets you killed. So it's a lot darker, and probably a lot darker than some of the things that it influenced, like Star Wars. And
even the connection between Dune and Star Wars, having now read the book, because people always talk about, you get like those fuckers like Razor Fist will say like,
oh yeah,
George Lucas ripped off Frank Herbert or whatever. Maybe Razor Fist doesn't say that, but I'm particularly irritated with him lately.
Yeah.
So I'm just throwing him under the bus.
Yeah, I mean, Frank Herbert also had made some statements about Star Wars that it ripped him off. But I think that kind of comes from a place of ignorance of what other things George Lucas also took from, because it can't be the case that Frank Herbert can go, George Lucas ripped off my entire thing, and then Akira Kurosawa could come forward and say, George Lucas ripped off my entire thing. Like, it can't be both of those. It has to be that both of your stories also just kind of speak to a general kind of Joseph Campbellian hero's journey thing, and there are specifics like probably the desert planet and stuff like that. and
maybe some aspects of like the Bene Gesserit.
yeah,
influence,
the voice being kind of like the Force, and like with Hidden Fortress, the whole thing of that movie being told from the perspective of the two peasant characters is kind of similar, or it's literally the influence of A New Hope being told from the perspective of C-3PO and R2-D2 for a fair amount of the movie. So I think Frank Herbert probably he had his own reasons for not liking Star Wars and thinking it ripped him off, but he also died I think he died in like 1984 or 85 or something. 86.
Sure, yeah. Okay.
So I don't think a lot of George Lucas's like many interviews where he kind of lays out all of his influences were around at that point. So I could see the case being made that he just wasn't aware of how much other cinematic influences there were as opposed to literary ones.
Yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
That's all right. It's it's kind of hard to figure out exactly where to start with Dune.
Yeah, it's a crazy it's a crazy book.
It's not exactly difficult. I think because when people talk a lot about Dune, they'll be like, oh, it's so like dense and like literary or whatever, and it's like, I mean, it's good, but it is a sci-fi novel and it's fairly well readable. I think the first half of it, I was kind of plowing through it. Once we got to around the second half, I was kind of slowing down. I found the cross-cutting over to the Harkonnens quite tedious by nearing the end of the book.
Yeah.
Because I didn't like living with them for too long.
Yeah, they're disgusting people. Everything about them is just depraved.
It's like a boring kind of disgusting. It's
they're like the ultimate. The whole thing with like the Bene Gesserit testing Paul to see if he's a human being or an animal. Where was I?
I don't know.
Bit of an interruption there. But yeah, as far as like Dune, I think we were talking about Dune in relation to Star Wars. Were we, or were we just talking about it like as a? So there was like a 5-minute point there where we were had to pause for a moment. So completely lost my train of thought.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It happens.
Yeah. As far as,
I guess let's.
Do we want to just go back to the book instead of just talking about Star Wars? Because I'm sure the Star Wars point is going to come up many times.
Yeah, I think now we just kind of, for just, I don't know, for our sake to ground us into the topic, we kind of talk about what Dune's about and what happens.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's a pretty complicated. I mean, the story is pretty straightforward, but as far as like the thematic elements go, it's like warnings of like Messiah prophecies, or like the idea of a Messiah. The whole like machinations of politics being a corrupting influence. There's like this whole thing about race consciousness in it that I fucking don't understand at all. Something along the lines of like because the terrible purpose that Paul feels throughout pulling him throughout the entire book is a jihad in his name that he sees pouring over the galaxy. And I read on the Wikipedia about what happens in his jihad in the later books. I guess spoiler warning if you've read the first Dune and you don't want to know about the jihad because it doesn't actually happen in the first Dune, and you plan on reading the other books, it kills like 61 billion people.
Jesus.
Yeah. It's like really, really bad. They like wipe out a bunch of different like religious beliefs and stuff in the process. and it's something about like the race consciousness thing with that is like culling the species or something to like
at times it felt like Paul was like becoming like an alt-right white nationalist.
It's informed by like some sort of scientific thing that is just no longer a thing anymore, I think. And it's kind of interesting how many different like roles he fulfills throughout the story, because it's like he's Paul Atreides, son of the Duke of Arrakis, who then later becomes the Duke of Arrakis himself. But he's also known as Muad'Dib amongst the Fremen, who are like the natives of Arrakis.
Yes.
But he also has a secret name that is only known to the people within his specific sietch that he belongs to, which is Usul, and that's what his wife, Chani, calls him in the book.
Yeah.
She calls him Usul.
Although she winds up being his concubine. Not really his wife.
Yeah, she's not his wife.
Yeah.
And
it's very Song of Solomon.
Yeah, and he's also known to the Bene Gesserit as the Kwisatz Haderach.
Yeah, try saying that 3 times
and
fast.
The Kwisatz Haderach equivalent to the Fremen is the Lisan al-Gaib. So he's got like 50 different nicknames in this book, and they all work. They all fit together. Like you could put it in one sentence. It would be crazy, but you could put them all in one sentence. It'd be like Duke Paul Muad'Dib Usul Atreides, the Kwisatz Haderach, aka the Lisan al-Gaib. Like it's pure. Like if you tried to explain. Like, there somewhere out there is like the most obtuse explanation of Dune theoretically possible that you could give to someone as a new reader. You're like, oh, what's that book about? And it's like, you tell them that, and they're like, get the fuck away from me.
Are you scaring the hose? Yeah.
Scaring the hose. As it is written. Hose scarer Paul Atreides.
He scares the hose.
He literally does.
The madness of Muad'Dib, Princess Irulan.
Yeah, the madness of Oh man, I really liked those like
those epitaphs or whatever that
they like denote
chapter.
A new chapter.
Yeah,
is just like the writings of the Princess Irulan, all these different books that she has, like all this different writing that she's done about Muad'Dib. And it's really cool how almost all of them sound completely different to the Paul that you are actively experiencing as the book is going on. Yeah, like the kind of things that he's saying in these chapter breaks compared to how he thinks about himself and this terrible purpose and all that, compared to the writing that is like telling of the doom that is to come. It's really cool. And it almost reads like you're like reading fucking like hadith from the fucking like Muslim religion, where it's like retelling the events of like what Muhammad was up to in his lifetime.
Right.
Because Frank Herbert loves Muslims. Like there is so much Arabic influence in this book. It's crazy.
And he's a real Islamophile.
Yeah, that's like one of the main differences between Dune and Star Wars is that George Lucas is just a good old weeb, but Frank Herbert is the more rare variant, where his whole thing is the Middle East.
I thought you were going to say George Lucas is a Christian, which is also true.
Yeah. No, I just meant like a lot of the aesthetic influence to Star Wars is Japanese, and a lot of the aesthetic influence to Dune is Middle Eastern.
And I was talking about this with my cousin when we got out of Dune Part 2.
Yeah.
But the like political machinations and undercurrent, like the things that go on in the book feel very Muslim, even though I don't really know much about Islam beyond annoyances on my timeline.
Yeah.
But I do think there's still kind of a Christian overtone to Dune, even if I think this is even too what's the phrasing I'm looking for. I don't think this is intended by Frank Herbert. I think this just has to do with growing up in a culture that is more predominantly Christian than predominantly Muslim, and so maybe you could say it's more like Jewish or Zoroastrian. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing with Dune is like it's set in the year like 10,195 or something, but
yeah.
The thing about that is that's an in-universe different like calculation of the year than the one we're using, because in reality it's actually like the year 20,000. But like the 10,000 thing is I haven't read the other books, but there was some sort of like the thing that installed the Padishar Emperor, the one that is like the one leading the Imperium throughout the book. There was like a jihad against computers in the Dune universe, and that's why all their ships are controlled by human being spice navigators, because there's no like there's no computer that calculates how to get from one place to another in space in the most in the fastest amount of time, or with like avoiding obstacles and stuff. You've literally just got fucking coked out dudes in a ship in space that just have prescience because they're on this fucking like desert crack.
It kind of reminds me of Nova with the one chick reading the tarot cards to figure out what to do.
Yeah. It's pretty crazy, and like the spice is like the most important resource, just because it's the entire thing that fuels their ability to fly through space. It prolongs the life of the people that use it, and I think it's also the case that like once you start using spice, if you try to stop, you'll like die. Like there's like hints to that in the book. Yeah. You'll fucking die if you stop.
Arrakis runs on spice,
Yeah. Is that like America runs on Duncan?
Yeah.
Christ. Duncan, Idaho.
Yeah.
My favorite character.
My favorite character in the Villeneuve movie for sure.
Okay, yeah. I find his name very funny. Duncan, Idaho. I saw a tweet comparing it to Indiana Jones. Where just like the bit was like a state being one part of your name. I just like the idea of Duke Leto being like calling him by his real name. He's like, the dog's name was Idaho. But yeah, he the whole thing with the Atreides, it's kind of like a brilliant layered story about like the reason behind everything is perfectly rationally explainable once you like have the full picture kind of drawn out to you by the end of the story, where it's like the Atreides kind of represent like the actual noble benevolent ruler. The Harkonnens kind of represent this purely animalistic, hedonistic like corruption of those that rule over others.
It's like the Apollo Dionysus.
Yeah, and I think I actually remember the point I was making when we were interrupted, which was that the Harkonnens, or when the Bene Gesserit are testing Paul at the beginning of the book, they put his hand in the box, and they use their like mental powers to make his hand feel like he's feeling searing pain, and they put this poison needle up against his neck called the Gom Jabbar, which is a cool fucking name for a poison. And the whole point of the test is to see if he has the willpower to not give in to his animalistic urge to escape from pain, and can make the conscious choice to endure suffering in order to obtain the proper outcome to a situation. And then she grants him the title of human afterward. She calls him a human.
Which is honestly kind of based.
And the Harkonnens are kind of like the complete inverse of that, where everything they do is whim.
Subhuman.
It is subhuman. It is all just driven by the whim of the moment. It's driven by like an animalistic, hedonistic, pleasure-seeking mindlessness.
There's even like a like a pederastic like undertone to everything they're doing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think what I was getting at there was all of the Harkonnen sections. Like at first, it's like it's okay, but like
yeah.
I don't remember. I don't remember exactly when it was, but at some point, I was like halfway through a chapter from the perspective of like Fade Rotha, I think is the character's name.
Yeah. Fade Rotha.
Fade Rotha, and I was like halfway through that chapter, and I was like, man, I'm fucking bored. Can we get back to Paul?
Yeah, there's nothing interesting about the Harkonnens. They are very much just like they are evil for being they're just the representation of like anti-human scum, as Alex Jones would put it. they're like Alex Jones's conspiracy.
They are interdimensional child molesters.
They are interdimensional child molesters. They are the Clintons of the 10,000s. Yeah. You know, like their era's Clintons.
The Baron Harkonnen's island, yeah.
The pleasure planet.
The Lolita frigate.
God. But yeah,
except it's boys or something.
Right. The whole kind of story is kind of driven by the fact that Paul's father and the trio of his like best advisors, Duncan Idaho, Gurney Halleck, and Thufir Hawat, are all like, and his mother too, are all kind of like devising this new way of fighting called the Weirding Way, and it kind of combines Bene Gesserit teachings, which are traditionally only taught to select women, because the Bene Gesserit are all like these witches, basically.
Yeah.
So it's like her Bene Gesserit teachings being taught to her son, combined with this fighting style that is supposed to be able to make them like very formidable fighters, and that is why the Emperor kind of sends them to Arrakis. Is he's threatened by their new way of fighting, and he kind of devises this plan with the Harkonnens to. It's like, oh, well, we take Arrakis away from the Harkonnens, who've ruled it for like, I don't know, centuries, something like that.
Yeah, time doesn't really mean anything in Dune. I found.
Yeah, it doesn't really matter how long they.
It could be yesterday. It could have been 10,000 years ago. It does not matter.
Yeah, they've been controlling that shit for a while, and the Emperor takes it away from them while secretly plotting with them to like send the Atreides there to then turn that planet into like their tomb, basically. But Duke Leto kind of he knows it's a trap. But he willingly walks into the trap because there is a potential way out of the trap, which is to ally with the Fremen, because they're also like these insanely skilled warriors. And the story kind of goes with like your nature, or your or rather, I guess it's your nurture. Kind of like the environment you are brought up in is what hardens you. Because the Fremen have to live in like this desert planet where you can't even walk rhythmically on sand. You have to like do a specific kind of, it's almost like a dance, so that you don't attract the giant sandworms. So the whole thing with the Fremen is like they are very formidable fighters. So it's like them in combination with the Atreides weirding way would make them like this unstoppable force that would threaten the power of the Emperor. So it's like the Emperor's plan to completely fuck over the Atreides is kind of a gamble, but it kind of requires for the whole thing to kind of fall into the Atreides favor, requires the entire journey that Paul goes through, where he is the Kwisatz Haderach. He's a male that is capable of learning the Bene Gesserit power, and there's something along the lines of like when a female Bene Gesserit becomes a Reverend Mother, they get the memories. It's like a genetic. It's the idea of like your memories are encoded in your genes of your the memory of your ancestors are in your genes, which is cool, like as a sci-fi thing, but it's like total nonsense in real life.
Yeah, it's kind of like that. I think it's more closely related to like what Paul is talking about with the race consciousness.
Yeah,
I think it's less to do with like your race, quote unquote, and more to do with like your culture. And so
I think the race consciousness thing is literally like human beings.
Well, yeah,
as an entire thing, not just like.
Sure, fair, okay.
But
you like, see the connection I'm making there.
Yes,
right?
Yeah.
Okay.
The whole thing with like them is, the Bene Gesserit that become Reverend Mothers, they get the past experience and memories and wisdom of every female in their genetic lineage, but they don't have the memory and wisdom and experience of any males in their past.
Yeah. Right.
And they refer to it as like that place which you dare not look, because like if a Bene Gesserit tries to like search within her mind for this genetic memory of the males on her lineage, she just fucking like goes insane or dies or something. But the Kwisatz Haderach was like this sort of prophecy that the Bene Gesserit came up with of like selective breeding for centuries to kind of get a male capable of taking the substance that creates Reverend Mothers, where he's able to get the genetic like memories and wisdom of his male line and the female line.
Yeah.
So in order for the entire Atreides plan to fight back against the Emperor to even work, requires Paul to literally be like the chosen one and know and have prescience about every sort of like possible future that could be.
Yeah.
And then kind of like weed through all the choices that would lead to a bad outcome to find the one that would work. And that's kind of the story of Dune, is like his fight against that, but then realizing the only way he's going to live is if he becomes Space Hitler. Like, it's pretty wild.
I think it's closer to Space Muhammad.
Space Muhammad, sure, yeah.
Yeah. But I remember when I was reading the novel, I think I was making a lot of Star Wars comparisons,
sure,
and also contrasts with Star Wars, because I think there's a lot of differences, and I think that's pretty clear. With all of the chosen one, oh god, I hate that I'm going to say this, but the like chosen one trope, as the booktube people like to say,
sure,
as it's shown in Dune, there's this kind of like, for lack of a better phrasing here, a cynical atheist version of the chosen one here.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, because he's not chosen by any sort of god. He's created by the flawed system that governs the galaxy, the Bene Gesserit, and their control over not just people, but like the ruling houses as well. And over the breeding of these royal houses, like they get a say in that, where they have like final say on it. So like he's the chosen one, but it's the result of a twisted evil plan that brings about the chosen one. But he does defy them in the end, because the whole thing with their plan was that his mother Jessica was supposed to give birth to a daughter that they were going to marry off to Fade Rautha. And then I think that was supposed to be just another step on the ladder to creating the Kwisatz Haderach. Because presumably they want whoever was going to be this Kwisatz Haderach, they wanted that person to be someone that they groomed from childhood to follow their teachings and believe in their mission and all that. But because she had a male heir in secret and kind of taught him on her own, Paul is not really he is the result of their it's not even really, to them it's not a prophecy, it's just a plan. But they create a prophecy for the Fremen where it's like the idea of this figure coming along to pull the strings and lead them. They just expected that they would be pulling the strings of him pulling the strings, you know, but they weren't, and it kind of just backfires, and then space jihad happens.
Yeah,
it's
and
it's kind of hard to talk about Dune now that we're actually trying to do it, because like it's a pretty complex web of like plans within plans, as they put it in the book. There's always like a scheme that has a backup scheme, and the role of Paul by the end of the book is kind of like he has prescience to know all these plans that are going on around him and just find the one path forward where he can kind of come out on top. It's pretty heroic in a sense.
Sure.
Except for the fact that obviously he's willingly choosing to prey on the faith that has been instilled in the Fremen. And then
there's very much a kind of a violation of the third commandment happening.
Yeah.
He is taking God's name in vain, basically.
Yeah. And
because they talk all about God, and there's a thing in there called the Orange Catholic Bible.
Right, yeah. That's not even really in either of the movies.
No,
they don't mention it at all.
Yeah, all of the like religion stuff is kind of excised from the Denis Villeneuve one.
Same with the Lynch one to a degree, but that might also just be a result of the Lynch one being a 2-hour movie that is condensing a 900-page book.
Yeah, but I mean, there is one scene in the Lynch one when Paul is talking to Duncan and they talk about God or whatever. So there's one scene in it. There's like no scene in the Denis Villeneuve movies.
Yeah, I don't think I forget who even gives him the Bible. Was it Duncan or was it Gurney? It was one of those two.
I want to say it was Duncan.
Okay, that would make sense if they had a conversation about God.
Yeah, it's not entirely clear to me what the Orange Catholic Bible is. I'm just going to assume it's like I think it's the 73 books that the Catholics have.
Maybe
because the Protestant Bible has 66 books.
Yeah, I think it's kind of inserted into the story as to be the case that like Paul is trying to draw from a source of like moral teachings.
Yeah,
but he's trying to be moral, and he's seeing the failure around him of trying to be moral, and he kind of just embraces. I don't even know if I want to call it determinism, because it's like the idea of the prescience in Dune to me kind of comes off as like you literally have so much knowledge that you are capable of seeing and understanding what would happen, like the logical conclusion of your actions and someone else's actions based off of your ideas and their ideas of things.
Yeah.
Which I guess to an extent is determinism.
Yeah, I was trying to get this. I tweeted something out the other day about Dune because I had seen this clip, and I don't know, we might add it in here. I'll send you the clip and see if you want to add it.
Yeah.
There's a clip of Frank Herbert talking about Dune, and I don't know if you saw it, but the guy's like incoherent when he tries to talk about Dune.
Yeah.
Like he tries to make some kind of point about like what Dune's about, and it's just like a lot of word salad, and I like more word salad than like Gom Jabbar, Muad'Dib, Kiswat Haderach. Like it's more than that. And so I think there's this might make it sound like I dislike the book. It's not true. It's there's a kind of almost incoherence to Herbert, and maybe a bit getting into Dune.
Yeah, because it's like if you tried to untangle Jordan Peterson's ideas about things, but he wrote a novel that incorporates all of his like stuff he's got going on. instead of just
Yeah,
writing like
especially.
weird like maps of meaning and that other shit.
Did you ever read any of those?
No, I've seen the graphs and stuff and things that
I've
he's
seen
got
the
in
graphs.
from maps of meaning, and they all look fucking insane to me.
Yeah. Okay. So this is what I said. Having just read Dune, something about Herbert screams passive voice, but in a philosophical sense. So it's not quite naturalism, as Ayn Rand would put it, but it's something similar to that.
Yeah,
But at the same time, he's like working in these like heroic tropes or whatever.
right.
But they almost feel like they're like canceling each other out, and
Yeah,
yeah, Dune is hard to talk about.
it's very hard to talk about now that we're like trying to, because I was like, the story's pretty straightforward, but then you get into like what the fuck it's about, and it's kind of all over the place in that sense.
And I think it could come down to like going back to the Rare Candy episode I had. Matt Fresta said because we were talking about Stanislaw Lem, and he I'd found like a bit of him talking about Solaris, and he had said he was shocked by the Tarkovsky and the Soderbergh film that they focus so much on the romance that's in the novel.
Okay.
And if you read Solaris, the romance is the whole story. Like that is the story.
Okay.
But it has these kind of ornamentation and decoration of like Stanislaw Lem's like autist science stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So he thinks it's all about that, but that would be like if James Cameron's Titanic was all about like the ship stuff.
Right.
Which it's there, but there is something else that's holding it together. So I think I'm just running into this wall with these like sci-fi authors of the new wave, they call it.
Right.
They want to essentially subvert the tropes of like the classic like Heinlein type sci-fi.
Sure.
And it kind of fits that there was that whole big discussion about Starship Troopers like a few months ago all over on the timeline. But there is it's kind of like the problem of like postmodern, post-structuralist philosophy of like dismantling something before, but without providing a clear, centered morality, philosophy,
right,
aesthetic.
I think it kind of does approach that near naturalism, as you kind of put it, where it's like in real life there is no like central theme to the goings on within the world. There are conflicting plans and ideologies and schemes and so on, and Dune kind of like flies close to the sun of that, where it's like you're trying to present something that you view as close to reality. It's where you've like got like there's not as it is indicated by our inability to speak about this. It's like trying to talk about like just what is going on in the world right now. You're like, Jesus Christ, you'd be talking about like a billion different things.
It's like, to bring it into like the real world, it's like if someone said the conflict in Israel is solely based on these, and this is kind of a point that's made, solely based on these specific treatise and treaty and border like discrepancies over the course of time period, but it's not about philosophy. It's not about the thing like our what's what I'm looking for. There's no ideological basis for what you're doing, and it's all
right. There is a cynical view that it's basically just like land dispute and greed to take land from others, as opposed to any sort of like philosophical differences, ideological disputes, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can kind of see what you mean as far as like that kind of comparison.
Yeah.
It's
And of course, this is this has always been kind of like a discussion podcast, not really a review or anything.
Sure.
So if you're expecting us to get like particularly coherent about what happens in the book,
right,
likely not going to happen. The what was the thing I was saying earlier? Oh yeah, because Matt Fresta, who was on the Rare Candy episode with me, he had said, because I had brought up that point about Solaris and Stanithal Lem, and he said that you really can't trust writers to accurately describe their work.
Sure.
And I think this is true with some exceptions. I think some people have fairly good grasp on what they're doing.
Yeah. Kind of to bring it back to Star Wars, George Lucas is very clear on basically every front about what Star Wars is about.
Yeah. Or Ayn Rand, of course.
Yeah, well, that's obvious.
Yeah.
Not so obvious to people that don't like her, though, because I don't know if you saw that fucking Jacobin piece that was going on.
The word Jacobin just activates a level of hatred and rage.
Yeah, of course. They were basically saying
I can't look at a quote Jacobin piece unquote.
Yeah. I didn't bother reading it because why would I?
Yeah.
I just saw some people that I know retweeting it, where the tweet that they had made as like the thing that's supposed to draw you in and make you read their article that they wrote was like, Ayn Rand's philosophy is about how people should just accept the rule of their betters. Like, it's like, how the fuck do you get that sort of reading out of this work? And it kind of just goes to show you, like, you can't, no matter how clearly you present your ideas, if there is someone out there that is dishonest enough to try and portray you as the exact inverse of what you're talking about, or just someone who's just downright retarded and doesn't know.
Well, I mean, they can't be retarded. It's a specific.
Oh, not in this. In that case, that is like a specific ideologically motivated attack. It's not retarded there, but like when I say retarded, I'm referring to like the people online who like talk about a piece of media as if they know what it's about, and they literally have no idea what they're talking about. Yeah, and it's like it's like that kind of thing going on, but and that can happen even with the most clearly presented ideas possible. And to some extent, it kind of happens with Dune. But at the same time, Dune is also all over the place. So, like, Frank Herbert can say, you know, oh, Dune was supposed to be a warning, and Dune Messiah came out to more concretize the idea of what is specifically wrong with Paul Atreides and what he does. Because the first book kind of just hints at the jihad and what was to come. And you only really see him take advantage of the Fremen's religious belief in him. But at the same time, you could also see the argument to be made that, like, the years that he spends living with and fighting alongside them, that he truly does love the Fremen. So he takes the fucking blue worm juice that makes you into a fucking prescient
Super Saiyan,
like a Super Saiyan. He takes that because he sees no other way to free them. So, like, you could make the case that, like, he cares about them so much that he's willing to sacrifice his soul and become this horrible thing out of a desire to find the one true path forward where the Fremen aren't obliterated by the Harkonnens and the Sardaukar and all that. But then Dune Messiah comes out, and apparently it's a lot more clear just how evil and kind of depraved the whole jihad thing is. And you've got Dune 2 out right now, part 2, and I've seen like the Muad'Dib Sigma edits, like fan cams on Twitter and shit. It's fucking hilarious. It's like him standing on a cliff overlooking thousands of Fremen, and he's like, long, glory to the fighters, long live the fighters, or whatever. It's like playing the Sigma music. Fucking retarded.
Real hero from Drive.
Yeah. But there is a version of Dune that could exist within the mind of someone where he is the hero. And it might just be the case that like the book presents the final confrontation in such a cool way that you can't help but respect it, because the ending of this book is fucking awesome.
Yeah, it's so cool.
I think the Villeneuve version of the whole finale works better than the Lynch one. Not to dive too much into the movies yet. There are issues with the Villeneuve one that kind of take that point of the ambiguity or the non-committal of the original to portraying the story as like a cautionary tale. And feeling this need to hammer it into you that it's a cautionary tale as opposed to just letting it be what it is.
Going so far as he did this video with like Variety or whatever, where he's like just verbatim explaining the thematic elements of a scene.
Yeah. Doesn't Variety do that a lot with like directors where they like bring them in and be like, explain this scene?
But what normally with those videos is just doing they call it like notes on a scene or whatever. It's just why they shot the scene like to look like this. It's not so much like this is why this character's like this. This is just what we're showing here.
Yeah, I get what you mean, because his entire thing with that was about Shawnee's character. Yeah.
He's like, I made it very clear what the theme was, and there was this really funny Yerk P tweet where he was like, I was gonna go see Dune 2, but Denis Villeneuve was so kind to just explain the entire movie to me in this one video.
Yeah. That is a problem of our time, where like everything has to be clearly laid out for the viewer, lest you mistake it for something else. Because I could see with how downright fucking stupid people are now, that if the movie did not present Chani as being like this clear audience surrogate where you're like, oh my god, he's taking advantage of these people and he's turning them to be more fanatical and so on, and I won't go along with it. If they didn't include that part in the Villeneuve movies, there'd be a billion pieces out there about how this movie fucking puts forward the white savior trope.
They still did that.
They still did that? Oh my god.
Yeah.
Some people are too stupid to be stopped.
I had replied to that Yerk P tweet with a Dune Messiah. It's just going to be a video essay. And
H Bomber guy is going to come in and do the cinematography for Dune Messiah.
Anthony Fantano presents Dune Messiah.
The first the Villeneuve movie started with a narration from Zendaya's character. It'll just be like a YouTube video essayist doing the beginning of there'll be a Skillshare ad drop 15 minutes into the movie.
Dune 2 starring Wendigo.
Yeah. Awful. I don't even think he's one of those types. I think Wendigo is like a Christian gun-loving guy that does like internet horror shit. But yeah. I started listening to some of his videos. Some pretty good. But it's just the idea of Wendigo presenting Dune. Just as far as like the entire series of Dune, there's like 26 books now. I don't know if you knew that. Because after Frank Herbert died, his son just started cranking those motherfuckers out.
Yeah.
So I don't even know what Dune is about after like the story of Paul Atreides is over. Because apparently his son, not the one that dies, in the book. He has a new son that he also calls Leto Atreides. Which is kind of funny. The idea of like he loved his dad so much he named his son after him, and then that son died, and then he had another son. He's like, that's Leto Atreides the second right there. And yeah, apparently that's a thing in the later books. He becomes like a fucking god emperor or something. I have no idea. It's
god emperor of Dune. No idea.
The Herberts started taking the spice themselves.
Yeah. I might read Dune Messiah, but I don't know if I'll continue with the series after that.
I don't really have anything pulling me to Dune Messiah. The original book, as far as I'm concerned, is like just in its prose and the way that the story is kind of presented, and the just kind of thinking about it. I don't know if I'd say masterpiece, but I really like it. I don't know if I want to just.
I kind of like. I like it the way it is. Yeah.
Because there are some things where like. Do you need to franchise this? No, you don't. Just have it be the thing that it is. And that it's hard to talk about this book.
That's all right. I think
as a point of comparison, it might be easier if we start talking about the movies, and then you can kind of take specific concretes about the movies and then bring it back to the book. So you wanted to talk about the Villeneuve movies first.
Yes. I saw the first one when it came out in theaters. I was 10 minutes late to the showing, so I missed basically just the exposition dump at the very beginning of the movie.
Right. Both of the adaptations have an exposition dump. At the beginning.
And so I missed that, and I never did watch the movie again, so I don't know what exactly happens there, but I read the book, so I have a pretty good idea.
Okay.
And I thought it was fine, but it was basically just half a movie, so I couldn't really judge it, which is quite irritating. That you have to make a nearly 6-hour movie, basically, of this thing. I liked Duncan Idaho in the Denis Villeneuve movie. He was the Jason Momoa character. He was really cool.
Yeah.
Not a whole lot of complaints on the first half, although I quite enjoy the relationship between Lady Jessica and Paul Atreides in the book more.
Yeah.
I think both of the Villeneuve movies make Jessica out to be more of a clueless white woman.
Yeah, the Bene Gesserit in the book come off very, very stoic and very sure of themselves, and it is like they have control over like every muscle in their body. Like they are basically like a super soldier woman who is just like standing there calmly and scheming on a plan. But the movies kind of like reintroduce a lot of femininity to the character, in the sense that she is presented to be a lot more emotional in the movie. And I don't necessarily mean that in like a demeaning way, like, oh, women are fucking, they are. And I don't mean that like to be like mean. I don't need to justify myself. I'm just fucking saying it. But yeah, she's kind of not as calm and collected and sure of herself in the movie. At least in the first one, because in the second one she takes that like the worm juice that turns her into a Reverend Mother, and from that point on she's basically just in scheme sociopath mode for the rest of the movie.
But up until that point, she's kind of portrayed as like the clueless Karen white woman that has to be like told what to do by all of the what's the word I'm looking for, noble savages or something. There's a real like kind of very cynical and kind of sinister like liberal political take in the Villeneuve movies that I it's much more pronounced in the second one, that I found quite irritating, and it's coupled with the I hate how these movies look.
Oh.
They don't. I think the best comparison is going to be the David Lynch version, where there's like color. I hate all of the like really gray, black rooms with no one in them in the Dune 1 and Dune Part 2. There's there's so much that annoys me about those two movies, and also basically all of Denis Villeneuve's sci-fi movies. Have you seen Arrival?
These are the first two Denis Villeneuve movies that I've ever seen.
Okay.
So, this might just be an aesthetic point of difference here, but I actually kind of enjoyed the way that they looked. I will agree that the Lynch films had a lot more color to it.
Yeah.
Some of the character designs were a lot cooler in the Lynch one. I did prefer the look of the Harkonnens in the Villeneuve movies, just because I found the Harkonnens genuinely fucking hard to look at in the Lynch movie, and it's like, you know what? Congratulations, because they're disgusting and they're supposed to be disgusting. But like, they introduce the Baron Vladimir Harkonnen with pus being sucked out of fucking pustules on his face. And I was like, this is not a good sign of what's to come for these people, because this is fucking nasty.
Yeah.
He's just like a fat like blob in the Villeneuve movies. But in that one, he's like genuinely like a fucking disgusting weirdo. And both Fade, Rautha, and Raban seem actually retarded in the David Lynch movies. Like, the way that they act, like, especially Raban, he literally looks like he's fucking out of his mind the entire movie. Like, he's got a dopey smile, and I don't know, it just it bothered me. But I guess them being dopey, you know, hedonistic fucking idiots, you know, makes sense.
I think there's a thematic consistency to the David Lynch film that I like, and there's a real gray, and not just in color but in style, and maybe monotone feeling and look to the Villeneuve movies that it really grated on me when I was watching, especially the second one.
I think I would disagree, but I mean, I can't really articulate why. I mean, I haven't seen his other stuff like Blade Runner 2049 or Arrival.
Both of which I also dislike quite a bit.
Yeah, you might just not be a Villeneuve guy.
Well, that's the thing. I may just not be a Villeneuve sci-fi guy, because I quite like Sicario, I quite like Enemy, and Prisoners. So I like his like more grounded stuff.
Sure.
But there's a Bret Easton Ellis quote that he gave on Denis Villeneuve after he saw, I think it was the first Dune. He was like, said Villeneuve is a visionary without a vision.
Oof.
And I quite agree, because he's clearly like talented and has a sense of scale and scope, but like what he puts on the scale and what he scopes out is just kind of empty, I find, and I could be in the minority here. But there's something really soulless I felt, particularly in Dune 2, and even more so than in like Arrival and Blade Runner 2049, which I've heard I might need to give Blade Runner 2049 another shot, but
Yeah, I still haven't seen it. I've watched the original Blade Runner, have not seen 2049. I do like Ryan Gosling, literally me.
Yes.
So I might like that movie. But I was talking to Dan, friend of the podcast, Dan, on Discord.
Americanitis.
And he's actually of the opinion that Dune should have been 3 movies, as opposed to the 2 that we got. No, I mean like Dune, the book, the first book, should have been split into 3 movies. Villeneuve wants to do Dune Messiah as a single movie, which to my understanding, Dune Messiah is significantly shorter than Dune.
Yeah, it's like 300 pages. It's like a part 4 to Dune, basically.
Yeah, it is a movie that you could make, or it is a book rather that you could make into one movie. And I saw a YouTube comment somewhere where someone had said that something along the lines of like Dune is the anti-Hobbit, where it's like the Hobbit was one book made into 3 movies when it really only needed to be 1, and Dune is like, especially with the Lynch one, is like if David Lynch were actually given the ability to produce or to direct 2 or 3 movies, as opposed to the 2-hour one we got, it probably would have been way better. But of course, like most of the issues with that are a result of interference and refusal to give Lynch like what he needed and like final cut privilege and all that other shit. So he just hates that movie. He actually refuses to see the Villeneuve movies, not out of any hatred of Villeneuve, but just like he said it would like physically bring him pain to experience anything related to Dune because of how much he hated working on that, or like hated what they did to his work.
And it's unfortunate because like the material that's on the screen of David Lynch's Dune is good. Like it's a good movie. It's got problems. It's not perfect.
It falls the fuck apart in the second half. It is crazy. Now, as far as the Villeneuve movies, I watched part 1, like I want to say 2 weeks ago, and I watched part 2 in theaters last Thursday. I think it was. Yeah. Last Thursday. I had fun. This might be just the fact that you go to the movie theater quite a bit. I haven't been to the movie theater in forever. So like actually going to the theater and having my seat shaken by the audio and just like the big screen and all that it might be just the case that I have like, you know, the rose tinted glasses about that whole thing.
You still got the consumer brain. Yeah,
that and my fucking eyesight has been just going to shit recently.
Oh man. Sorry.
And it's so I was like seeing the big screen. It was pretty cool. I realized the other day like I desperately need glasses because my grandparents were driving home, and they needed help emptying their suitcases out of their car, and they're like, "Can you come over and help with that?" And it was like starting to get dark out. But by the time I was done, it was pitch black out. But when I was driving there and I was like looking at the speed limit signs, like I know from where I live to where my grandparents live, I know what the speed limit is at every given point, just from memory. But like I was like, man, I can't see what that sign says until it was like right there. And I was like, that's concerning. I shouldn't be driving anywhere that I don't already know what the speed limit is. So yeah, I fucking need glasses, man. I'm just throwing that in there because I've been thinking about it a lot recently.
He's been burdened with terrible purpose. He has to get glasses.
Yeah, I gotta get glasses. I got the consumer brain. I went to the movie theaters and I had fun. So that might be that. As far as like certain actors in the movie, I liked Josh Brolin as Gurney Halleck, but as far as like comparing it to the Lynch movie, I wish we got to see more of Patrick Stewart's Gurney Halleck.
Sure.
His look in the like end of that movie is insane because he's got the skullet. He's got the bald head with the long hair in the back, but you don't really get to see a good look at it. But that's what he's walking around with, and it looks fucking insane.
Yeah.
And like you can't just take Patrick Stewart with his classic like bald with the hair around the sides and the back, and then casually introduce Skullet halfway through the movie and not comment on it. Like, that's not allowed.
I currently have this problem with Patrick Stewart where I can't see him and not hear him like bitching about Elia Kazan getting his Lifetime Achievement Award because he ratted out some communists.
Oh. Yeah, I mean,
there's this pretty famous video of like right outside where Elia Kazan's getting this Lifetime Achievement Award, and a bunch of people, actors and shit, are like bitching and moaning about it, even though Elia Kazan is like obviously one of the great directors of all time.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's just a Patrick Stewart aside.
Yeah, I think it's just a general British thing, is they don't hate Karl Marx enough. Like, they've got that motherfucker, like, he lived there, so they're oh, he lived here. Oh, we must respect him. And it's like, he's got his big fucking stupid head on a fucking grave in the UK, and it's like, throw his fucking skeleton in the ocean for all I fucking care, and fucking blow up that fucking sculpture of his head on a live stream for a bunch of 13-year-olds to fucking watch. Like, fuck Karl Marx.
Have Shia LaBeouf come on to the live stream.
Yeah. So it's like, British people don't hate communism enough. Probably because they've had the Labour Party as their alternative political party for like a century. Yeah, so it's like, over there it's like conservative and fucking communist is basically it, as far as they go.
and the conservative is like a rhino here.
Yeah. They're fucking stupid over there.
Like it's like it's more mixed economy than us.
No. I have a bone to pick with every British person, and
yes,
it's because,
and you're not even American.
Yeah, I know. Which means I am more influenced by them than you guys are. Because their fucking king
you're
is
still
also
technically
like,
ruled by the king.
Yeah. I was gonna say queen, but that fucking bird's gone.
You're a member of the Commonwealth. That's the phrase.
The Commonwealth, yeah. Where like you see some shit go down, and British people are like so ignorant of how the world functions that like there are debates over there as to whether cops should have guns.
Yeah, British people are just like perpetually in college.
They're perpetually like in a fantasy land of like lollipops and like gingerbread castles and shit,
and
where they're
Muslims.
Like they're like they're like in the candy land where they're watching gingerbread children get raped, and they're like oh dear, don't get the Bobby over here though, that would be bad. And it's like, fucking, you're so stupid. Like, you've got people that are actually saying shit like, oh, having cops on the fucking trains wouldn't stop stabbings. It's like, if you gave them guns and they shot fucking people that stab people, then yeah, they would stop it. Like, are you insane? I saw a gun documentary the other day where there was a British customs officer guy who was like, this is just like the British hate section of this entire thing.
This is like the pizza rant for British people.
Nothing to do with Dune. Where they were like scanning for guns that were illegally entering the country, and the guy was like concerned about the ability to reassemble a firearm. They were like, oh, if we disassemble the gun when we get it, we might not be able to reassemble it to test fire to see if it really is a functioning firearm that could have been a danger. And it's like, hold on a second. It's like in a sci-fi universe where like there's like a Star Trek episode where there's like a society that has like this supercomputer that does everything for them, and they don't know how to maintain the computer. They don't know how to do anything because the computer just does it for them, and it's starting to malfunction. So it's like they have to relearn how to do everything because they've just been fucking fed everything for their entire existence. It's like British people have existed with a nanny state for so long that their cops specifically trained to be able to like find weapons and test them to make sure that they're like not a danger, don't know how to reassemble a gun, which is a thing that you can. It's like when you're a 9-year-old and you take apart a fucking piece of electronics and you can't figure out how to put it back together. but it's like an entire state of people that are like that.
Yeah.
It's just like, God, you're fucking embarrassing. That might be the end of the British rant. It might come back.
Yeah.
Point being, they're dumb, and I don't respect them.
Shout out to the British people.
How did we even get on this fucking part of this? I don't remember. Oh, Patrick Stewart, right?
Yeah, Patrick Stewart.
His Gurney Halleck was
loser.
cool. And there is a shot in that movie where he charges into battle holding a pug, and he shouts, "Long live Duke Leto Atreides," and it's fucking insane.
Yeah, it goes hard.
Yeah, I was. There was a thing I was trying to remember what I wanted the thumbnail for this video to be. It might have been that. If I can remember what it was, I'll bring it up later. But it might have been that.
Yeah, the other main annoyance I had with Denis Villeneuve's Dune is Chani, the Zendaya character.
Yeah, I wasn't a fan of basically any change that they made to her character from the book to the screen, because it's almost deliberately antithetical to everything she was.
Yeah, and like there are like scenes in the movie where like Shani will do something, and I was just asking myself, like, why is she not getting shot right now?
Yeah.
Like how can she like just stand up in this crowd against like
their religious leader now?
Yeah, like how is she not just getting like lynched?
Smited, getting brought into the desert and have stones thrown at her like it's fucking 780. Yeah. Like the whole thing that they did where like they had to create this whole contrivance of like, oh, the people in the southern part of the planet are the ones that really believe in the Muad'Dib, or in the Lisan el-Gaib prophecy.
So gay.
So it's like, oh, she's a northerner, and they don't really like every other northerner has to be convinced, which kind of doesn't make much sense if you've got an entire half of the world's population who isn't even really that convinced of this Messiah thing, where the whole point of getting the Fremen is that there are millions and millions of them that are hidden and believe in this prophecy. And the whole North and South thing was also not an element in the first movie. The first movie did not differentiate, and in fact, the North is the only part of the planet that is known to be occupied. The Harkonnens didn't even know the southern half of the planet had people. And the Fremen that show up when Paul arrives are presumably Northerners, and they're all yelling Lisan al-Gaib when he gets out of the ship. So it's like, it seems like they deliberately introduced this idea of Northern and Southern Fremen to create a situation where Shani isn't too radically outside of her character to be reasonably expected for someone who has grown up in a religion or with prophecies of a specific Messiah figure. So they're just like, oh yeah, an entire half of the planet isn't really all that into that. But he somehow manages to convince all of them except her. She's the only one that he doesn't convince. Because at the end of the movie, the jihad starts and they're all getting into ships, and she is shown alone on Arrakis calling a sandworm. So it's like, all the stuff with Shani I did not like. I still liked Dune 2. I know you didn't, but I still enjoyed it.
Not a fan.
But yeah,
there were things I liked. I liked the even though it's like different than in the book, I liked the combat scene between Paul and Fade Rotha.
Yeah. I was also a big fan of the actual thing that was taken out of the Lynch movie, which was Fade's birthday.
That was cool.
Which sounds funny without the knowledge of what Fade's birthday was. Like the idea of just like, oh, there's a scene where the bad guy's birthday. That's like, no, it's like he's a psychopath who's like killing people in an arena combat. And
the part with the guy that's not drugged is quite cool.
I did like how they kind of went with like an aesthetic thing of Gaiety Prime's sun, or there was like something with the way that the sun works with their planet is like everything becomes black and white under direct sunlight, but like the interiors are colored, as dull as it may be in its coloration. There's like a scene where the Baron is like being floated out into the open, and the scene changes to like the harsh black and white. Which I thought was a pretty cool aesthetic touch with Gaiety Prime. But yeah, overall, I think Austin Butler did a pretty good job as Feyd-Rautha. There's not really much to compare him to, because Sting barely does fucking anything in the David Lynch movies as Feyd-Rautha.
He's basically just Sting in the movie.
There's like, he shows up, he giggles, there's a scene where he's in like weird space underwear. And then he fights at the end and dies, and that's it. I kind of wish he had been introduced in Dune Part 1, because Feyd-Rautha is in scenes with the Baron in the early parts of Dune. Like, he isn't just introduced in the latter half. He's there. And he's being groomed as the heir from the get-go. But that's just not present. They completely diminish the importance or any sort of focus on the Mentats as well, which I thought was kind of annoying.
That's true. That's true.
Both with the Harkonnen one, Piter. Excuse me, I got a dry throat all of a sudden. Piter, who was like the Mentat for the Harkonnens, and Thufir Hawat, who was the Mentat for the Atreides. He disappears after the attack, and then he just doesn't have a scene in Part 2, which is kind of annoying, because he has probably one of my favorite death scenes in the book.
Piter, you said?
Thufir Hawat, sorry.
Thufir Hawat, okay.
Yeah, because he's loyal to Paul and he's loyal to the Duke, but after they're wiped out and presumed dead, he is taken by the Harkonnens and forced to become their new Mentat after Piter died. And he had been unknowingly working against Paul from that point onward, because no one knew who Muad'Dib was. They didn't know it was Paul Atreides. They just thought they just knew it was this new Fremen religious figure. And after he fights Feyd-Rautha, the Emperor still has like one final plan within plans to kill Paul, which is that Thufir Hawat has like a knife that is poisoned, or like a vial of poison or something that he's supposed to kill Paul with. But Thufir Hawat is still loyal to the end, and he kind of feels this guilt for having betrayed Paul, so he kills himself and dies in Paul's arms, which would have been really cool to see on screen, but neither of the movies does that. The Lynch one, they filmed the scene, but they never put it in the movie. And Denis Villeneuve did film scenes with him, but apparently Villeneuve has this thing where he does not do deleted scenes. He does not do like a new edition of his movie. If it's not in the movie, he like permanently deletes a scene, like it's just gone forever. So there is no existing copy of Thufir Hawat's scenes from Dune Part 2 out there. They're just gone, which is unfortunate, because I actually kind of liked his portrayal in the first movie. Did not like Piter's portrayal in the first movie, where he's like that weird, I forget what that actor's name is.
I can't remember either.
Hold on. Let me just find him on the wiki here. How the fuck do you pronounce this guy's last name? David Malkian? I have no fucking
David Dastmalchian.
Dastmalchian, yeah. I've seen him in some things. I didn't really like him as Piter. I thought he just kind of blended in with the other Harkonnens.
He's kind of like the go-to like weird villain nerd actor.
Yeah, the movie barely even comments on what a Mentat is. He blends in too much with the other Harkonnens, and there's nothing visually distinct about what the Mentats look like, while the book describes them as their lips are stained red from the juice that they drink that lets them perform these, like, because the whole purpose of a Mentat is like basically a replacement for computers.
Yeah, human computers. Yeah,
they're like strategic calculator individuals. And they drink like a spice-laden drink that lets them do this shit. And as a result, all mentats have like these stained lips, not present in the Villeneuve movies. Piter looks exactly like every other Harkonnen, and Thufir Hawat just is like a mixed race guy that's old.
Another change in the Villeneuve movie, the like boy lovers from the David Lynch movie, and I think the novel as well. They're changed to women.
Yeah, they changed the Baron to not be as explicitly homosexual.
Not be a gay pedophile. He's just a straight pedophile.
There's like the one scene where he kisses Feyd-Rautha in the Villeneuve movies, but that seemed
which apparently was like. Well, I think Austin Butler had like
he had like
improv that scene.
Improved him being way too into it and then kissing him back, which it made a funny GIF. I will say that. He that scene kind of made it seem that Feyd was the more freaky one there. No, the Baron. There's like a scene early in the book where the Baron is kind of thinking to himself about his scheme and how awesome he is for having for how he's going to destroy the Atreides. He's like a comic book villain in that way, where he's like, "Oh yes, I'm so brilliant." How
he's like toying with Paul at the final confrontation in the book.
Oh no, I'm talking about the Baron, not Feyd. There's a scene early in the book where the Baron is thinking to himself about how great it's going to be to kill the Atreides. And then he thinks to himself about getting a little boy toy to play with, and he's like, "Oh, someone that looks like that young Paul Atreides." And then the scene just the chapter like ends, and you're like, "What the fuck?" He wants. I
love how
he wants to molest a boy that looks like his enemy's son before he kills his enemies. It's just so fucking depraved. But they've removed that almost entirely.
I think that's the one of the main things about the Villeneuve movie that annoys me, and it kind of annoys me about all movies now, is just a distinct lack of any kind of sexuality in it at all.
Sure.
It feels very stale to where, compared to the David Lynch movie, which just, it's mostly kind of gross, but it's at least something.
Yeah. Another thing that kind of bothered me about Chani's portrayal. Yeah. In the book, they use each other's secret names, which is supposed to be like an intimate thing between Fremen. Is that she calls him Usul and he calls her whatever it means, like desert spring or something.
Sahia or whatever.
Yes, something. It started with an S. I just couldn't remember exactly what it was. But like once the time jump occurs in the book and they're like together, they refer to each other with these hidden names, and it gives you a very quick and surface level indication that there's a great deal of intimacy between the characters. But the problem with the Villeneuve movie is there is no time jump. There isn't an extended one, because what takes 4 years of fighting and planning and agonizing over his fate in the book all occurs within the time period of his mother being pregnant with her daughter, which
Aaliyah,
so like he manages to take down the Harkonnens and the Empire within the span of like 9 months or less, which is a choice. I don't really care for it all that much. The Lynch movie fully leaned into it and has, because Jessica takes the worm juice while she's pregnant, the embryo of her daughter also gains this insane power of being able to see the memories and wisdom of all her female ancestors.
Yeah.
So like, while pregnant, the embryo is capable of talking and having like these deep philosophical conversations with Jessica. But then she's born, and then she's like an infant. I guess by the end of it, she's like 4. But like, there are scenes where she's 2 years old, and she's like talking and like she knows about things that a toddler doesn't know because she has all this insane. She's been exposed to this forbidden knowledge kind of thing before anyone else had ever been. I wish that would have been shown. That would have been kind of cool to see.
Yeah, the scenes of Jessica talking to her embryo reminded me of these scenes in Blonde, the Marilyn Monroe movie.
Have not seen it.
When it's very good. When Marilyn is talking to her embryo as well.
Oh.
I also I'm really tired of Zendaya right now.
I've never really cared for her.
I think she's really bad in the movie. Like it's a problem.
Yeah. There was a point I was making earlier that in the book they use each other's Usul and whatever her name was, Sihaya or something like that.
Yeah.
In the movie, they not only does her character have to be the inverse in that she doesn't believe in the Lisan al-Gaib prophecy, she still has the romance with Paul, but they never portray it as being deep or meaningful because she deliberately tells him not to use her like secret name, and she doesn't use his. She doesn't call him Usul. There's a part where she calls him Paul Muad'Dib Usul Atreides or whatever. But from there on, she never calls him Usul, which was like their thing in the book. So it seemed needlessly antagonistic to how she was portrayed. Like you could still have it would make the tragedy of trying to portray her as falling out of favor with Paul, or rather falling out of love with him.
Yeah.
If you actually portray her falling in love with him, because they really don't in the movie.
Yeah,
they kiss each other in one scene, and it doesn't really work.
Yeah, she's the only thing that she's been good in, I think, is Euphoria.
Not seen it,
and it's weird why she is good in it, because she's basically just a foil to all of the like crazy sex crazed girls around her.
Yeah.
But she's also there's a voiceover in Euphoria, and she does the voiceover.
Okay.
And there's something about her kind of scowling, sardonic performance that she gives in everything that works in Euphoria.
Right.
That doesn't work anywhere else.
Sure.
And I think she's a big problem in the movie, and I dislike the movie greatly, but I think she's the worst part.
Yeah, I didn't really care for her portrayal, and it might mainly be driven by the knowledge of why she's portrayed that way. Because it's specifically like this sort of ham-fisted attempt to make it obvious to you that this is bad.
Yeah.
When it's not a sign of a good movie-going culture when the director has to go on the biggest fucking media outlets and tell you, yeah, this story is a warning. He meant it as a warning, so I'm changing it to make it more obvious that it's a warning. And we're changing this character to make her to give you a glimpse into how wrong all this is. And it's like I don't care. Like,
yeah, it's like that Howling Mutant tweet. He's like, "Don't tell me the protagonist is a bad person. I don't want to fucking hear it.
I don't want to hear it. Just show me the story, present it as it is, and I will deduce that myself."
Yeah.
I don't think I need to be told. And of all the characters to choose, it's like his love interest. It's like at that point you could almost view it as like her dislike being somewhat petty and not even like principally motivated.
Yeah.
So like it doesn't even really work as a means of making the audience naturally view what's going on as bad.
Yeah.
I don't know. I you didn't like it. I enjoyed what I experienced in the movie theater. I think it mainly outside of what happens with Zendaya at the end of the movie, I liked the ending. it's I don't even think I necessarily like um Christopher Walken's performance as the Emperor either.
Yeah, that's a weird casting choice. I don't know
I
why
liked
he's
the
there
Emperor
at all.
in the Lynch one actually.
Yeah.
There was
He feels
actually
like a real person.
there was some actual. He felt way too old in Dune Part 2. He felt tired. He felt out of his element.
Yeah.
While the Emperor, I guess the Emperor in the Lynch one also felt out of his element because he's fallen prey to Paul's scheme at the end. But Christopher Walken, it comes off as like he's an old, tired, real man portraying a character that isn't supposed to be that way.
Yeah.
Kind of like Robert De Niro in The Irishman, where he's supposed to be playing a 40-year-old and he's like 80 whatever.
Yeah.
With de-aging tech on all over his face.
To be fair, I've heard if you like go to opera, you'll have like 80-year-old actresses still playing like 15-year-olds.
Gotta respect it. I don't think that was a particularly good casting choice.
Just odd.
Yeah.
He was kind of distracting, honestly.
Yeah. I don't know. I thought the final duel was a lot better choreographed than the one in the Lynch movie, because that one barely felt choreographed. It just felt like Sting was just like flailing a knife around.
Yeah, I don't even really remember it.
Yeah,
in the Lynch movie.
The only thing I remember about Feyd-Rautha in that movie was the underwear shot, and then the fact that Paul kills him by stabbing him in the chin, and then the knife goes up into his mouth.
Okay.
That shot, and that's about it. Very forgettable final antagonist to have there. And I think it fails because they left out the scene of him being like fighting a non-drugged Atreides man in the arena to kind of give him like this sort of, he's like a sick and twisted guy, but at the same time he has like this weird honor about him where like he tries to give the guy like a fair fight in this arena, but he's still ruthless and just murders a guy in front of thousands of people.
Yeah. So it's less honor, it's more of like the thrill for him is besting someone that's actually good.
Yeah. And
so it's not that he wants he wants the fight to be fair because it's fair. He just wants to show that he's on top.
Right. He also wants to be hurt, which is something that Lea Seydoux' character points out about him in the Villeneuve movie. Which is like
synesthetics queen Lea Seydoux.
Yeah. He loved. There was a I don't know if you saw this. There was a brief time where Synesthetics posted a tweet where it was something about a T-shirt, and he posted the tweet, and it was like, "Oh, I got mine. Like I got my one of these shirts or whatever." But and it has a thumbs up in the picture, and it's clearly a woman's hand. So like all of Twitter was like, Synesthetics is a woman. But it turned out he just took the picture from some fucking Instagram account or something. So it was quickly debunked that Synesthetics is still a horny man on the internet and not a woman.
That everything is right in the world.
Yeah. We couldn't handle Synesthetics actually being a woman. That would have been too much.
Yeah.
The world would have collapsed.
That would be cause for jihad, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. It's I think the Villeneuve movies are worth watching as like a package if you were to watch them as like a whole experience.
Apparently there is we had talked about this a bit. I thought about watching it, but I decided not to.
The miniseries?
The miniseries, yeah. Apparently it's quote unquote more faithful to the novel. Not really sure what that means, but
yeah. I did find it kind of funny that Austin Butler who I guess more recently, actually less recently because it's an older movie than Dune Part 2.
Yeah.
The whole bit with him going around was he played Elvis in the Elvis movie, and
Yeah.
for a while he was like stuck in the Elvis voice. It's like what people tell their children to stop making a face or else their face will get stuck like that. Like he did that with Elvis and legitimately just kept talking like Elvis. And then when he did Dune Part 2, he watched a bunch of Stellan Skarsgård performances and tried to model his performance after Stellan Skarsgård to kind of go with this he's the true heir to the Harkonnens, where to the point where he even talks exactly like the Baron.
Yeah.
And I thought he did a pretty good job. He did sound like him. It sounded kind of weird coming from a young guy.
Yeah.
Especially with the fact that Raban was played by Dave Bautista, and he did not sound anything like the Baron. So it's not like there was a consistent thing throughout the vision of the story.
He was also pretty bad in the movie.
Yeah, I saw this clip of Dave Bautista talking about how Denis Villeneuve was the only director that showed him any like who was like trying to tell him that he's a good actor. And he's like, no.
Yeah, I saw that. And I was like, oh, I think Villeneuve might.
I was like, I think he might have just been being nice to you because like I watch these movies and all he's doing is screaming.
Yeah,
his entire thing is just yelling and being petulant, and it's like. It's not that Raban's character was this great masterpiece of a character that is destroyed by the performance, because Raban kind of faded into the background as far as the story goes in Dune anyway. Like, in the book, he's basically like, oh yeah, he's the one that rules over Arrakis, but he's retarded, he sucks, and he doesn't know what he's doing, and he's just a scapegoat that is going to be killed. And he does get killed.
Yeah.
But in Dune Part 2, they change it so that Gurney Halleck personally kills Raban, which, again, I like Josh Brolin's performance as Gurney Halleck, but Dave Bautista I did not really care for at all.
Yeah, I kind of like the like old Hollywood like star-studded cast feeling of these movies.
Yeah,
even though I think a lot of the casting is a little like fan casty. It doesn't really fit. It's just like, and maybe it has to do with like the just quality and caliber of actors that are available to a high budget film like this, where like some of them are good, some of them less so. A funny thing about Austin Butler is he's been around for quite a while, at least in my lifetime.
Yeah,
he used to be like a Disney Nickelodeon guy.
Yeah, he was on the fucking Hannah Montana show. I saw a clip going around where he was like, he was on Hannah Montana and they're like watching a scary movie. He's like shrieking.
He was on Classified. I think he was
like a background guy.
Yeah. He was like a guest star on a lot of those shows that I watched as a kid.
Yeah, I wonder if he was getting head in the Nickelodeon parking lot.
I wonder if he's going to show up on the Quiet on Set documentary.
Jesus Christ, that would be something.
And then I think he had been doing other movies up until this point, but I think his like big breakout into like main like movie success was he was one of the Manson murderers on Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Yeah.
Yeah, he had the he's the one that breaks into his house at the end with the revolver, right?
Yes, yeah.
And he has his like face gnawed off by the dog.
Yeah. It's great.
Yeah. I think my favorite part about that scene is when he launches the can at that fucking bitch's face. And her face is just bloody and her teeth are all over the place and she's just crawling on the floor.
Yeah, and it's
there's
like
something truly funny about like about him just launching a fucking can at someone's head.
And like a lot of the reviews in the movie are like, this ending is misogynist and it's all about beating women. It's like, it's about beating murderers.
It is a cathartic, not to get into fucking Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. It is like it is Tarantino like correcting like one of the greatest evils committed in Hollywood like ever.
Yeah.
of like,
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, these people like ruined so many lives. Here's a clip, here's a video of them getting their faces caved in and lit on fire and mauled by dogs. Like, that's what they deserve. Instead of what happened, which was that they killed a pregnant lady and a bunch of other innocent people.
Yeah, and I think Sydney Sweeney was one of the girls there too.
Oh, was she? I don't even remember.
I think so. Yeah. I think. What do we want to finish off here talking about the David Lynch movie? What I guess we've kind of said everything we want to say about it. But.
Yeah, I mean, my main problem with the David Lynch movie is really the second half. The first half is it comes in pretty strong. I did like, apparently, in theaters when that movie came out, they lacked confidence in the audience's ability to just take in terminology within a universe and then just like figure out what it means throughout. To the point where they handed people slips of paper that explained the terminology, and you can find pictures online of these like pamphlets telling you what a Gom Jabbar is and what a Kwisatz Haderach is and all that other stuff. And it just
there's appendices in the back of my copy of Dune.
Yeah,
I did not read them, and I followed it just fine. So
yeah. But like that movie starts with like a 4-minute long, and it didn't feel very long when we watched it. The Princess Irulan opening narration, which I think thematically fits because she does that in the books. There's like her writings are periodically sprinkled throughout to give you insights about what's to come. So I think it made sense to have that opening thing where she's talking directly to the audience. But the main problem with that movie is how much gets skipped over in the second half. Like when we were watching it and I hovered over like the thing on Netflix and it was like there's 50 minutes left and they had just met up and joined with the Fremen. It's like, this is the point that Dune Part 2 starts off at, and that movie's like 2 hours and 45 minutes or whatever. It's like they're going to do all of that in 50, and it's to the point where like Paul's romance with Chani in the David Lynch movie is like the spinning newspaper in fucking
Looney Tunes or whatever,
or like it's like
SpongeBob.
It's the spinning newspaper that shows up to provide you like a piece of information in a thing. It's like swirling image of Paul and Chani kissing. It's like, okay, they're in a relationship now. There's like nothing that is built between them, which is still a failure in Dune Part 2 as well. That I didn't really like Zendaya's character, but like in Dune 1984, there's almost no actual explanation as to why Paul and Chani end up together, and there's no exploration of it either because she literally just there's like time jump, they're kissing, okay, now it's time to do this, and the whole like war against the Harkonnen occupiers on Arrakis is also told through like a montage of their spice things blowing up. And then you're just suddenly at the end where they're bringing all the worms and stuff into Arrakeen and ambushing the Emperor.
The second half is definitely the weakest part, but I think the overall like product that is there, I think, is much more interesting, I think, artistically than the Denis Villeneuve movie.
I had fun with it. It was
even if it's kind of a failure as well. So.
Yeah, it's an interesting movie. It's also an interesting what if to think about. Like if Lynch was actually given the proper creative control and the ability to turn it into like a 2 or 3-parter instead of trying to tell it all in one.
Yeah,
like what could have been? Because what's there is actually quite good.
And it says a lot that Dino De Laurentiis, who produced Dune, also went on to produce Blue Velvet after Dune's failure. So it says a lot about Lynch that even though he they both had this like debacle they worked on together.
Yeah.
That he still had enough faith in him to say, okay, let's do Blue Velvet. And that's probably where Lynch's career really took off, was Blue Velvet.
Yeah.
Which is like his fourth movie, I want to say. And yeah, we're going to do a series on David Lynch. I got a few episodes in mind for that.
There's some pretty cool stuff in the finale of the Lynch Dune as well.
Yeah.
I think both of them don't really do justice to Paul's character in that final scene as it was portrayed in the book, because everything he says is like a complete and total decimation of every single individual in the room that dares to speak up against him in the book. And in both of the movies, they do the thing where he uses the voice on the Reverend Mother Mahayam, and he tells her, he says silence, and she freaks out.
It's really cool.
It's cool in both of them, but I actually prefer the more out there way that the voice is portrayed in the Lynch one. Like if you re-listen to the way he says silence, it's got like this wonky, like almost cartoony to the modern ear, but like sci-fi-y sound to the way it distorts the audio. That's really cool. And he says, I remember your Gom Jabbar, you will remember mine, I kill with a word, or something like that, which is a badass line. And in that one, it seems to be like he's not just like a Muhammad figure, but he's like a literal god, because he makes it rain on Arrakis at the end of the movie with his mind. It's so weird.
Yeah.
I was like, hold on, does that happen in the... Because I watched the Lynch one when I had like a couple chapters left, and then I finished the book. I was like, he didn't fucking make it rain on Arrakis with his mind.
Didn't happen.
What are you talking about? He went from like a messiah to like literally a god who could like dream rain on Arrakis and just make it happen instantaneously.
Interesting choice for sure. I love how in the book all of the thoughts of all of the characters are shown as like italicized, and it like jumps in between the different perspectives of each character.
It's also one of the things I actually really liked about the Lynch one is how it portrays the Spacer Guild, where the Emperor is like trying to tell Paul, he's like, how dare you, and then the Spacer guys are like, shut the fuck up. I know you're the Emperor, but shut up. He could destroy all the spice and we'll all be dead. And it just kind of shows like the power struggles within like the layers of their culture, that like this guild would tell the Emperor to shut the fuck up, and the Bene Gesserit are also exerting control over all these like different groups. It's just like different groups preying on each other the entire time. Which doesn't really get explored all that much in the Villeneuve movies. The plan within plans thing is a bit sidelined,
right?
In those, not that it isn't sidelined in the Lynch one, because again, it's 2 hours and like, what is it?
14 minutes, something.
137 minutes is what it says on on the wiki. There is I'm pretty sure there's some sort of like director's cut or something that came out later. But yeah, it also has a baffling premise where instead of the weirding way being like a hand-to-hand fighting style that the Atreides use, it's a gun called the weirding module that literally fires sound.
Yeah. That's the choice.
That was I hated that. I thought that was really stupid. Because like the Lynch movie suffers from this really big problem where it starts with a knife fight and ends with a knife fight, but does not portray knife fighting as the main means of combat throughout the rest of the story. Where like the book makes it very clear, shield technology exists, which negates guns because bullets are too fast to go through shields. It also negates laser weaponry I don't think they would have even had bullets by this point anymore. They would have been using laser weapons. But when a laser weapon shoots a shielded individual, it causes a buildup of energy so big that it destroys both the shooter and the wearer of the shield. Yeah. So it people fight with swords going back to an older means of battle out of necessity brought about by technology, which is an interesting premise to explore in sci-fi.
They both can't fire from inside the shield and fire at someone with a shield.
That's right, yeah. So you have to fight with knives. But the weirding module exists as this sort of like, it's sound, so it wouldn't actually blow up a shield. It's like this weird, it's confusing.
It's an odd choice that was clearly based on like a lack of resources to do like the fight scenes.
That's right.
In there.
And so in the book and even in the Villeneuve movies, there is more. There is more
knife foo.
Well, there is more maybe thematic relevance and stakes behind Feyd-Rautha and Paul dueling with knives at the end.
Yeah.
Because it is thoroughly explored in the Villeneuve movies, whether you like them or not, that everyone fights with knives, and they show the shield technology being used in knife fights, and that probably the coolest scene in the first movie is Duncan Idaho's death, where he fights off like 20 of the Sardaukar guys in a hallway.
Yeah, so
cool. Jason Momoa did a fantastic job as that character. Like it kind of dwarfs. I don't even remember what Duncan Idaho was like in the Lynch one. I think he gets shot in the head in that one too, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, might be right.
He just gets shot in the head and dies. Not nearly as cool. But in the Lynch one, it's like it starts with the knife fight where Gurney Halleck and Paul are training with knives, and they do that just to show off the shield technology.
Yeah, with the really awesome like early CGI shield.
Apparently, that wasn't even. You know what? I can't even get into explaining the technical side of what the fuck the shield was in that. It wasn't even CGI. It was like this weird. It was supposed to look like computer-generated effects as they looked in 1984, but it wasn't actually done with a computer.
Wow.
It was, which is kind of cool to think about that they would bother to do it that way. But it starts with a knife fight, then they use the weirding module for the rest of the movie, and then there's a knife fight at the end, and there is no scene showing that Feyd-Rautha is super skilled with a knife because they don't have the arena stuff, and Paul is only ever shown fighting at the beginning of the movie with a knife and uses the weirding module for the rest of it. So there isn't really the Chris knife and like the religious meaning of it being like the tooth of the worm and like the entire universe fighting with knives. It just kind of doesn't happen in the 80s movie, and that kind of bothered me because I think the whole it kind of takes away from what the layers of the book were going for there, because it's like Arrakis is a desert planet and there is the worms, and if you vibrate or if you make a consistent rhythmic presence within the sand, they can feel it and they come to you, which is why you can't use shields on Arrakis. And everyone fights with shields in the universe because it becomes a crutch, because you can sustain what would otherwise have killed you dozens and dozens of times without learning from that mistake, because it never was a mistake, because you had the thing that was preventing it from killing you. But then suddenly you're fighting against people that have never used a shield, who still know how to kill you with a knife, and you can't use your shield anymore. But then it just becomes, in the Lynch movie, like, oh, they just have this thing that shoots sound at people.
Yeah.
it takes away all of that, and it diminishes it to me.
One other thing before I think we're going to wrap up here.
Yeah.
The one thing I noticed reading the book versus the Villeneuve movies, Villeneuve talks about he claimed to be a big fan of David Lean, the British filmmaker, did like Lawrence of Arabia and Bridge on the River Kwai.
Right.
Known for these like big roadshow epics back in the 50s.
Mm-hmm.
And you can kind of see that with a lot of the like large, arguably empty vistas in Dune 1 and 2. But I felt more David Lean just reading the book than I did watching those movies.
Yeah.
I don't know if you felt similarly, but I don't know. I'm not sure what that means, but
yeah. I don't know. I found a lot of the stuff in the early part of the book was almost Shakespearean to me. If
Sure.
you had that feeling, the whole knowing from the get-go that Dr. Yui is the one that's is going to betray the Atreides to the Harkonnens is played as a shocking moment in the movie, when in the book you're well aware of it. And I don't know how you would portray that in a movie where like the audience is well aware way ahead of time that this guy is going to be the betrayer. I think you have a short-term, immediate emotional reaction to the reveal in the movie, but in the book it's like this dreaded Shakespearean ploy coming together, almost like when there's a character that has an aside and they're like the audience know, the dramatic irony, the audience knows what the characters do not, kind of thing.
Right.
And I find the fact that they wouldn't make use of that in the new movie was kind of disappointing, because you knew it was coming, you knew it was a tragedy that was about to unfold, but the movie plays it as like they're suddenly attacked and you're like, oh my god, what's happening? And then, oh my god, Yui is betraying them, what's going on? There wasn't as much, because the Shakespearean element is also like the dukes and the emperor, or I guess it would be analogous to the king in like a Shakespeare play. It had all those layers to it, which was really appealing about the first half. All the politicking and impending doom of the tragedy that's about to come. I don't know. I like the Villeneuve movies, but I think they are pretty deeply flawed adaptations of a book that I really like.
Yeah. I think to summarize my big problem with the Villeneuve movies, I think the Villeneuve movies take all of the stuff in Dune that I find incoherent and at times a little bit annoying, and not as much of the stuff that I really like of Dune.
Right.
And then he adds some other stuff that's just fake and gay. So
the modern lib agenda.
Yeah. The Dune went woke or whatever.
Yeah, no, not a fan of Zendaya.
Yeah. I guess kind of last two things that I wanted to mention before we sign off.
Sure.
One, overall, here's what I'll do. One, what do you prefer, Dune or Star Wars?
That's, I mean, like movies?
Just as products, as entities altogether.
I mean, Star Wars is something that I've known since I was like a small child, and Dune is something that I've explored in the last few months. So,
yeah, it's a tough comparison, but
it's a tough comparison. I think the first, like, just Dune as a book, the novel, fucking amazing. I loved it. It's a different kind of sci-fi to Star Wars. They both kind of have that thing of like everything is explained, but Star Wars, Dune does it in such a bizarre way. I think it's kind of the meme with Star Wars is that like every single tiny insignificant thing has an entry on some fandom wiki somewhere. So I guess they kind of share that in common. But but they're so like thematically different from each other, because like one is like
Sure.
Luke Skywalker is the chosen one, or I guess Anakin is the chosen one once you take the prequels into consideration, and he goes down a very dark path, but ultimately does fulfill the prophecy in a like twisted way, where like a bunch of people die, but balance is brought to the Force, while
he also
Dune,
kills the Emperor.
Yeah.
He redeems himself.
But there's a long and dark, twisted path that leads to that point. Is what I mean.
Yeah. Right.
There was some weird shit, where like there are people out there that think that balance in Star Wars means the same amount of Sith as Jedi, which I don't even want to get into.
Yeah, I thought that's what you were doing for a second. I was like, what?
No. I know that balance means there are no Sith, because Sith are corruption of that which is innately good. It is like an Eastern kind of thing going on there. But to get into that would just be like a waste of time at the end of an episode of the podcast. But
even for the Star Wars episode.
But Dune is like, you don't get to see what comes of the Chosen One prophecy. You see the rise of that, to the pinnacle, maybe not the pinnacle of his power, because I think the pinnacle of his power is probably at some point during the Jihad or after it.
Yeah.
But like, you see the corruption of someone that is good, and then Dune and Star Wars is very much good triumphing over evil. So they are very thematically different in that sense. But I don't know. I think I almost want to say that's an unfair question.
That's fair.
I think I'm very indecisive on that sort of thing.
I was going to say, just based on my brief experience with Dune, and also taking into consideration my very long and storied experience with Star Wars, I have to say I prefer the clarity and morality presented in Star Wars.
Sure. I mean, if Star Wars were still a George Lucas thing, then yeah.
Yeah. I'm just when I say Star Wars, I'm talking about George Lucas. I'm not talking about anything else.
Yeah. Couldn't give less of a shit if they were to make anything else Star Wars related. I mean, I'll probably play a video game if they make a cool one, but
yeah.
Other than that, I couldn't care less.
And the God, what was I saying? Getting tired.
Oh, my bad.
God damn it! What was I saying? Yeah, generally I prefer Star Wars, but I do like Dune a lot. I find what it seems to me as a kind of like post-structuralist critique of sci-fi, that does irritate me quite a bit at times. That's just my mood lately.
Right.
But it's nothing against the book per se, because the book is really great.
Mm-hmm.
And that just kind of, I think that kind of sums up my feelings about Dune. Very good. Would recommend at least the book. You can I can take or leave the movies. I like the David Lynch movie, but that's about it.
Yeah, I would say overall, the book is, it's the stereotype, but the book is the best.
Yeah.
There's always like, oh, the book fans always say that. It's like, no, read the book, and if you have a brain, you'll agree.
Yeah.
Because the book is really good. It's kind of interesting because I don't know if we said this during the podcast or right before it, but I don't really have anything pulling me to continue with Dune. I think the first book is just like what it is, and it was really good.
Yeah,
and I kind of
I'm a little curious about Dune Messiah, but I don't know if I want to, because Dune, I had this experience where I was like, I got to the end, I was like, I really liked that, and I never want to go to Arrakis again.
Yeah. Some things should just be the thing that they are, and then stop. We used to be able to do that. Now you can't. So I guess in the same way that I couldn't give a shit about what other Star Wars things come out, I also don't really care about anything beyond the story that was the first Dune. I don't really feel anything drawing or pulling me toward any of the sequel books. And I don't really feel anything drawing me to Star Wars as it exists outside of George Lucas's story that he told.
Yeah. Same.
So let that be what it is.
So fuck Brian Herbert.
I'm sure he's a nice guy, but they're not sending their best.
I'm sure some Brian Herberts are good people.
Yeah,
but they're not sending their best.
As women on the internet are prone to say, get that bag, queen. Keep writing. Write Dune 30.
Women or gays?
Women or gays. Yeah. Get that bag, Queen Herbert.
Yes, Queen Slay.
Write Dune
boots.
30. And all the nerds will buy it, and that's it.
Goon 2.
Goon. You just totally did that by accident too, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. Dune 2.5 HD remix.
Oh shit. Hell yeah. Goon 2.
Goon Messiah.
There's a tweet
God Emperor of Goon.
There was a tweet I made the other day where it was just a gif of Paul riding the worm and all the Fremen are like cheering. Because the Fremen word for the worms, they like worship them, they call them Shai Hulud. And I tweeted Fremen out in the dunes paying their respects to the Shai Halusi.
I'm still cracking up of that one meme you shared that was like when my favorite food passes the Goyslav allocation.
I saw that in the middle of the night yesterday and it was fucking hilarious. Oh man. Now we're just at the point where we're talking about any random shit that pops into our minds.
Yeah.
I think that's a good point to call it. This is the longest episode of the podcast we've ever done. We're over 2 hours now.
Yeah, and even with the pause I break, I think it's still going to be about 2 hours.
Yeah.
We will be back next week talking some Jackie Chan.
Oh, that's right.
Police Story 1 and 2. A little lighter subject than today.
A little lighter, a little more coherent. Hopefully we won't struggle to talk about a Chinese action movie. But
hopefully you got some enjoyment out of the discussion here. And follow us on Twitter, like on YouTube and all that jazz with Spotify and Apple.
Leave a comment on the YouTube video.
Call us gay, call us long-winded.
Yeah, say that we're retarded and we don't know what we're talking about, like I was criticizing people for earlier.
Which is true.
Yeah. Well, you gotta do something with your free time, so why the fuck?
Yeah. Well, if you made it all the way to the end of this one, thank you, and we will talk to you next week.
Yep, see you next time.